What's up? Welcome back to the Westworld Companion Podcast presented by thedisorderly.com. Check us out on Twitter at Disorderly Media, Facebook at Disorderly ENT, and then you can find me, your host, Nick Risner, on Twitter at Nick Risner, NickRizner. DM's open, so please approach me with any theories, anything you want to talk about. It's open. So I just finished watching Season 2, Episode 7, Les Écorchés. I don't even... That's wrong, but don't worry about it. Read it. It's in the title, so you pronounce it if you have a problem with the way I pronounce it. Dolores basically is attacking the Mesa and the Cradle, and we kind of follow that storyline. Obviously, there's other things mixed in, but the central sort of storyline of the episode is that, and there's honestly a lot of reveals. This episode had a lot of reveals. So, you know, I'd have to go back to Season 1, but I feel like around this time, Episode 7, 8, 9, something like that, we started to get a ton of reveals. A lot of sort of the mystery that's been building up, we'll finally get answers to them, and it seems like they're following the same trajectory now. So I would assume, you know, the end of this season here is going to be all payoffs. So if you've lasted this long and managed to not get that frustrated by the constant buildup of mystery, it seems like this is your reward. It's starting now. So first, just a little maintenance to keep you catch up. Things that we did learn before we get to like the big thing. So Charlotte Hale finally finds out that Bernard's a host because she sees him and all the different copies of him and whatever, and she tortures him. And the torture is like a pretty, I mean, from a writing perspective, it was creative, but it was pretty messed up because it was basically using the voice commands to make him think he's experiencing things he's not. Like, he was suffocating, and they're like, what are you doing? They're like, well, she's waterboarding him, kind of. But he's just sitting in a chair. But, you know, with the voice commands, they almost have to. It reminded me of Kilgrave, if you guys watch Jessica Jones, where you have to obey his command, and you can almost torture yourself. Like, Kilgrave could be like, hey, dispose of yourself, and you know, like, the person starts to put their hand down a garbage disposal. You know what I mean? Like, it's pretty dark. It's a pretty dark way of thinking about that. We also find out, I think some people speculated the bulletproof vests are more than that. Sure enough, they are. I don't know if this will play into things, you know, beyond this episode, but the vests apparently emulate the host mesh network. So it's almost like a little sensor. So they'll be going around a corner, and a host will be coming at them, and it'll light up red, and I guess that tells them that, you know, there's a host around the corner, and then they'll kill the host. It's like a proximity sensor of some sort. It picks up on the mesh network. So that's worth noting. And then obviously this whole thing where Dolores slams the train into the Mesa and causes the explosion, this whole attack is to get Peter Abernathy, her dad, but more importantly, to get the information in his head. And we actually see that later on in the episode when you know, she goes in, removes his little brain ball thing, cuts it out of his head, and she's got that with her now. So that's the mission. That's, you know, mission accomplished for the most part. We kind of knew this because it was, you know, we saw the 2 week jump ahead, and we saw that Peter Abernathy was now missing, even though, you know, at this point, Peter Abernathy was in control of Delos. So we knew that she got broken out somehow. Sure enough, she did. And that's where things stand with that. Now, while all this is going on, the big focus of this episode seemed to be all this stuff with Ford and Bernard. So the last episode ended where Bernard's basically plugged into the Cradle, which is this... I mean, the Cradle itself is a backup of all these different hosts. It's like your external hard drive that you keep with all your backup files, right? That's what the Cradle is. But what it actually does as well is run just repeated simulations, so that you can have like the backup Teddy and the backup Dolores and the backup Maeve over and over again running this simulations of their narratives. So you kind of test things there before you put them into actual host and actually allow people to experience these narratives as well. So it's like a test chamber, if you will, which actually might be a bad choice of words because they use that terminology for something else later in the episode. But nevertheless, Bernard kind of hardwires his way into this thing. They pull out his brain, they plug his brain thing into the Cradle or the simulation thing or whatever, and you see him going through as if he's a park guest. You see him arrive on the train, show up at Sweetwater, and kind of walk around and see a lot of the familiar faces that I just mentioned, except playing the piano is none other than Dr. Ford. So Anthony Hopkins, Ford, he's I don't know if alive is the right word, but his conscious has been downloaded into this simulation thing. So he's kind of been controlling. If you remember, they're saying that Cradle is fighting back. He's been controlling things from within the Cradle with his consciousness, basically. Like, human Ford is dead, but the consciousness of Ford is currently in the Cradle. And him and Bernard have this long conversation with a ton to unpack. So this is, an instant reaction. I don't know. I'd have to really dive into it to pay attention to everything, but I wrote down the major bullet points of what they talk about because it's such an important conversation with so much explanation as to these mysteries and the purpose of the park and all this crazy stuff, and it was all packed into this one conversation. They revisited it a few times throughout the episode, but most of it was front-loaded, so there's a lot of reveals right at the beginning of the conversation, so we'll focus on that. Actually, first, I wanted to spotlight this quote, because every once in a while there's just some I don't even know, brilliant, beautiful, probably a combination of both, writing in this show, and I just love it. So this quote from Ford when he's talking to Bernard before he kind of launches into the explanation, he says, "I don't think God rested on the seventh day. I think he reveled in his creation, knowing that someday it would all be destroyed." I just love that line. And also, this is somewhere in the middle too, I just loved it. He said, "The human mind, the last analog device in a digital world." Loved that too. So just wanted to spotlight those. I jotted them down in my notes. Figured I might as well read them to you. But anyway, it basically starts with this. The hosts are on loops for the purpose of an experiment. So Bernard even says, I would assume they're on loops, just for their own sakes to kind of reinforce their narratives, whatever. No, the hosts are on loops for the purpose of an experiment. They're basically the control or the unchanging part of the experiment, and the humans are the variable. So every decision that the humans make essentially unlocks another piece of the human consciousness puzzle, if you will. So once, after running multiple humans through multiple loops, but having the robots be the same, basically, you're unlocking pieces of the human consciousness, and once you have a complete picture of that, Delos can then copy the human consciousness, which that ties into that line about, the human mind is the last analog device in a digital world. Because everything else is backed up, he says that, every piece of data on Earth has been backed up except for the human mind. And this is basically a stab at that. Now, we saw them kind of doing this with James Delos, and it wasn't quite there. And Ford even reinforces now, during this conversation, he says, with the James Delos stuff, they weren't quite ready. Close, but not quite ready, which echoes what William said. So there's some theory, by myself included, that Ford had already mastered this process. It seems like nobody has. He's on the same page as Delos and everyone else. So no one's mastered this process of creating the exact person. Now, Bernard, who is basically a humanoid, a human/robot version of Arnold, the reason he works is because it's not a perfect match, because they had to make him more like the robots rather than a perfect replica of human Arnold. So if you want to call that mastering the process, I guess they have. But the final takeaway from this is that Ford, after this huge speech, basically downloads himself from the simulation world. He downloads himself into Ford's brain or control unit or whatever. So they pull that out, put it into Bernard, and boom, now you have Bernard and Ford in the same body, which is exactly, I actually speculated on that a while ago. I'm sure a lot of people have, but I kind of assumed that Ford and Bernard were in the same body, which could explain a lot of the confusion he's going through. It could explain why, even dating all the way back to the first episode, it seems like he understood things that were going to happen beforehand. It's almost like he was talking to someone that wasn't there. And I think that person, we literally saw it, whether it was reflections or him actually following a ghostly version of Ford. Now we know that Bernard is literally talking to someone who's not there because Ford is in his brain. So that's fascinating. And also, I'm extremely intrigued in that storyline, if for no other reason than because Anthony Hopkins is great and he's finally back in the show. So that's interesting in itself, but it seems like, I don't know what his plan is. Literally his plan is to go to the Valley Beyond. So they're on their way there. Dolores is on her way there. William's on his way there. Maeve, well, we'll get to Maeve in a second, but I think at some point she'll probably end up there. I just feel like everyone's going to end up in the Valley Beyond. Whatever that is, we still don't know. They've intentionally dangled that mystery in front of our face and not solved it yet, so we don't know what exactly it is. But, it's people say it's a doorway out of this place. Obviously, the doorway is the name of this season, so I don't know. It's very interesting. But that's the gist of that conversation. Side note, when the security team is attacking, they're fighting back against, fighting back against the attack from Dolores. How does that dude get seduced by Angela? The guy who actually catches Angela in the cradle about to blow it up and attempts to stop it, she seduces him because she's pretty, and she is very pretty. But it's bro, just shoot her. It was so crazy. That's so unbelievable that he understands. He just literally fought against killer robots this entire time. Breaks into this thing. There's one girl down there who he knows is a robot, and yes, she's very pretty. But if she turns around and starts to flirt with you, how would you fall for that in that situation? It's the number one. Why on earth would he not shoot her? Whatever. Whatever. I've heard a lot of people talk about this, how they make the Delos security overly dumb. Shouldn't this be an elite security team? How are they this inept, basically? But that was pretty ridiculous. I don't know if he would have stopped her anyway. Say she's seducing him, and then he pulls a gun when she just like blow. I don't know, because she used his grenade, right? No sense. That makes no sense to me at all. But rest in peace, Angela. I guess there's possibilities there's a backup or whatever, but seems like she's blown to pieces. Also, shout out to Terminator Teddy. He was going on an absolute killing rage. I don't know if people. I hope that some people start calling him that, because I feel like the alliteration works. Terminator Teddy. I feel like I'm going to use it for the rest of the season. But yeah, he's great. He's pretty badass. I was kind of getting sick of the whole sappy like hero role, so I'm glad he took a darker turn. I don't know what effect that's going to have on Dolores. We already saw people kind of use that against her. Like, what'd you do to this guy? Look at him. So, but at least in this episode, I thought he was cool. And then finally, just the update on Maeve, because she was throughout this episode as well, but it's kind of easy to wrap her up. So Maeve gets shot up by the Delos security team because Lee called them. If you remember, he called on that radio. The Delos comes in, shoots everyone, and then Lee also kind of stops. He's like, no, don't shoot her. She's special. We need her, whatever. So he stops her from getting killed. She's laying on a stretcher, all shot up, and then Dolores rolls through and meets her in the mesa, offers to kill her as like a courtesy almost. She turns down the offer, but she's in rough shape. So Lee, while this conversation is happening, Lee's kind of hiding, around the corner. And when Dolores leaves, you see that it's basically just Maeve and Lee still sort of hanging out there. They haven't actually interacted since then, but that's how it ends with them. But that's interesting too. I don't know what's going to happen with Maeve. She's such a huge character. I don't think she's going to die on that table, or she would have already. Like, there's going to be more to her story. I don't know if they can fix her. What happened to Felix and Sylvester? Because they're obviously technicians. They have the capabilities of patching her up. I wonder why they haven't. That's interesting. I don't know where they are. It's just, when that Delos attack happened, are they still out in that area somewhere? Are they taking care of Maeve's daughter now? I don't know what's going on. And then obviously the Ghost Nation was attacking too, which I'll say this. I know people don't like to hear the in the weeks ahead thing. I'll just say this because it's very, very vague. I'm not giving anything away if you avoid that part of it or whatever. But next episode seems like it's going to be a Ghost Nation episode. Lots of Ghost Nation stuff, which is interesting because that's been a constant mystery through the first two seasons. I'm curious what their role is and why they're gathering up humans and why they don't care about the hosts and what is their role. I'm very curious, and I'm hoping that we get all those answers next week. But that'll wrap it up for this episode. So I appreciate you guys listening. Head to thedisorderly.com for your best in sports and entertainment. Disorderly Media on Twitter, Disorderly ENT on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at Nick Risner, NickRizner. DMs are open. And wherever you're listening to this, YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, whatever. Wherever, Laughable now. We're on the Laughable app now. They finally hooked us up. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, rate, review, subscribe, tell a friend, share it. Just spread it around. That's how this thing grows, and we appreciate the hell out of that. Because I like doing these, but it's a lot more fun when I have a lot of people listening to me. I mean, I could talk to a wall by myself anytime I want for free, and it takes a lot less effort. So, final little bit of news and notes, too. I think I might do a Succession podcast as well. I have to watch it. I have to see if it clicks with me. If I do, that'll be more of a midweek one because I want to get the Westworld one out, immediately after the episode or the next day or whatever. Succession would be more midweek, later in the week, just kind of recapping it. I don't know yet, honestly. So keep your eye out. It depends on. I'm going to watch the first episode and see if it clicks with me. See if I think there's enough content to cover that, and we'll see. We'll see. Sharp Objects, another kind of front runner. The only other show I know for a fact I'm going to do one of these for is Game of Thrones. So I know I'm doing that when I get there. But outside of that, I don't know. We'll see. But I think Succession is definitely a possibility. So if I do that, you'll see it later in the week. If not, I'll explain why on the next episode of the Westworld podcast. So we'll see. I'm sure you're on the edge of your seat. And I appreciate you guys listening. Peace, guys.